Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal Podcast. Our guest today is Preston Zeller. Preston is the founder of Samlog and Zellerhaus.com, a venture studio. Preston, thanks for taking the time to chat.
Hey, Krish. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to chatting with you.
Uh, you know, uh, Before we get roll into the topic, if you could give a brief introduction about yourself and your company, and then after that we can get into the topic.
Yeah, sure. So I've been in marketing and I guess the broader umbrella of tech for over 15 years now, and combination of startups, agency world, and then at high growth SaaS companies. And so, yeah, I've been in and around that for quite a while now. And in that, I've held founder roles, executive roles, director, ICs, all the way up the ladder, I guess. And art is also a very important part of my life, so that kind of weaves into my backstory a bit. But yeah, so today I have a venture studio where I'm building tech products and really trying to be more purpose driven about that. So whether or not it's productivity or tapping into about that. So yeah, Zellerhaus is my venture studio, and then have products underneath that. So yeah, and of course using a lot of AI tools to be more efficient and impactful in the process as well.
Perfect. I shared your site while you were talking about it, so folks can definitely take a look at that, and I include that on the podcast as well. Thanks for that introduction, Preston. So let's, without further ado, we can jump into the topic, which I asked you what we probably could talk about before the call, and one of the first things you said was as good as any that I could have come up with. So let's start there. The title we've picked roughly is building impactful technology with AI and faith tech. So that's the title, and we'll see where the conversation takes us. The
Yeah.
first question I have, there's many things I'm going to learn the next 45 minutes to an hour, but to start that learning process, what is faith tech? Something that I had not heard of before.
Yeah, so I think it's just the larger umbrella of like how any spiritual practice or religion is using technology to augment what is a very traditional type of practice. So how is technology getting into spirituality? So
Wow,
I'm
that's
kind of at the
that's
forefront of that.
Okay, that's interesting. So for two reasons. One is it's interesting even otherwise, but two is because I don't know anything about it. So can you give our audience a brief intro into that space? Like, what does it mean? If you could take an example, it could be a
Yeah.
real life example or one that's creative as well, and sort of walk us through what that means.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll give you an example from one of my products that I'm building. It's called Psalmlog. And so that is basically how do you get relevant, personalized biblical advice anytime you need it? And there's an AI component to that for sure. And so with any kind of these modern technologies, and it could be research based, maybe you're just trying to understand whatever kind of religion you believe, the text around it, you're trying to better understand themes or connections that may be prevalent in your belief system. And then there's all sorts of modern tools that kind of blend, allow us to harness the power of large language models and things like that. And so what does it look like to apply those in a practical way to your beliefs and how you kind of go about reminding yourself each day, or how you do prayer or those kinds of things. um, it's not a new category, right? So if, let's say, you wanted to be reminded every day to pray at a certain time, you could kind of loosely qualify that as faith tech or meditate or whatever it is you're doing. Or you had some reading plan, and so every day you got reminded, hey, based on your desire to study this certain topic, here's that next book chapter and verse that you read in a given day. So again, I think those have probably been around since like 2010 or 2000, since the App Store came out. And there's been desktop software as well that helps you research. There's a further evolution of that that's happening with AI, that and just like the umbrella category of AI, that people like myself are really getting into the weeds on, and how does this really how does this maintain the integrity of your belief system without going off the rails? Because that is the chief concern of using AI in general. It's gonna like start making stuff up, right? And that's a tricky thing to wade into. And so I've gone into that headlong, and yeah, continue to every day, just thinking through those problems.
You know what, Preston? Very interesting. Everything you said there, I know very little about. I know very little about many things, so that's not new. But I know even more little about this thing that you just mentioned. So let's start there because I'm quite excited about the
Yeah.
next few questions I want to ask. And if these come across as ignorant, please excuse my ignorance as I'm
No,
asking these
it's
questions. Yeah.
okay. It's okay. Yeah.
So the first thing when you said that was, I thought, at least the quick assumption I made about faith tech was that you're using faith in building technology. But I think you said something along those lines, I think, but let's come to that in a second. But it sounds more like it's like along the lines of fintech, where you're building software to serve the space of faith, not so much using faith to building technologies, but maybe there is a component to it, but
Yeah.
actually building software to address the needs in the space of religion and being pious and whatnot. I mean, did I get that right for the most part?
Yeah. No, that's a that's a really. I'm laughing because you said using faith to build technology. In some ways, I think in startups we have a lot of faith.
That's true. We have that faith in ourselves and the
Yeah.
overall universe for sure.
Yeah,
But I was
yeah.
talking just traditional faith. Okay, let me ask you
Yes,
this.
correct. Yeah.
Okay, so that's faith tech. You know, the reason it's very interesting to me is, given the world we live in, right? A lot of
Mm,
us are under pressure on a daily basis, right? I mean, we live in
yeah.
a very competitive society, right? America has always been one of the places where research and progress happens. But in
Mm,
the last couple of years, especially with AI and everything about it being in the news, we are in the forefront of it, right? Very closely
mhm,
followed by China, or maybe they
mhm.
are ahead in some ways, but along around there.
Yeah.
And people are anxious for many reasons. What does AI mean to me? Am I losing my job? A lot of jobs are going to change. Things that existed today or existed a few years ago may not exist, cease to exist as a profession altogether. So while you are living your daily lives, going to work, commuting, or working from home, however you do it, you are under a lot of pressure,
Mhm.
and you turn to faith. I mean, I'm not a very religious person in the sense that I don't know much about religion, but I do go, I'm Hindu, I go to the temple occasionally. And a lot of times I go there because, Preston, they have great food on weekends in the Indian Hindu temples.
Yeah.
And that is a primary. My wife is like, Krish, are you going to see the gods or the food? I'm like, whatever it is, I'm just going to end up there once in a while, right? So
Mhm.
take what I ask with a grain of salt. So people turn to religion and faith because they want to break from this routine of life, the
Mhm.
pressures of life, right? And you turn to faith. So it is interesting to me that there was something called faith tech, meaning you're actually building technology, which very interestingly to serve people, serve the needs of people in that space. So if the question really I'm trying to ask in a long-winded manner is, what are some real life examples of real of needs in that space where you could, because I know a little bit about law or something else where I could build software for there. But if you
Mhm.
ask me, Krish, what are three problems in the space of faith, I'd be like, Preston, I don't even want to give a shot here, I have no idea. So what are
Mhm.
some needs that potentially get addressed in this space?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll speak best to the problem that I'm tackling, which is, um, and you pointed out, right? We have fast paced lives, fast paced society, information overload, distractions. And so I think one of the most important things, as I understand it, really, and regardless of what kind of faith system you're coming from, is like this matter of consistency. Some people are more culturally aligned with maybe a belief system, and that's fine. And then in other cases, like you're going to be very, what some people might say devout, but you're every day it's a practice to be involved in your faith in a very intentional way. Um, Now, the problem that I'm after is trying to help people better navigate life challenges where, whether they're Christian or not, and that's the angle I'm at, is whether they're Christian or not, they're looking at the Bible as a potential source for those answers, and they don't know where to look. And I mean, anyone who's ever looked at a Bible, and probably most people have seen one at least, it's a very large text. It's written over many years. It may be very hard to open that up and go, I don't know what I'm looking at. They might have a farming parable in there or something. And you're like, how does that apply to me? And there's some amount of what you just said that's interesting, where it's like breaking out of the routine. That could certainly be going to, a temple or church, right? But it could also be that you need some input or some guidance that is timeless and not just like, you know, I guess someone on a podcast talking about it, right?
Right.
or whatever, like you're scrolling in social media, which is just all fleeting stuff. You're watching these 30-second bites. So we are all having real problems at any given time, right? Some of them, maybe kind of just navigating everyday life and just challenges like parenting, relational issues. You have a difficult decision with a job. You have a boss you don't like. You're questioning things about what the fabric of society and news and what's going on and why did we bomb this place or go capture this guy in another country, whatever the case is. Like there's a lot of things we wrestle with, and Gen Z is, I think, having a lot more of those because it seems like, because of social media and the way the world is now, we're engaging with all the wild things going on in the world on a regular basis. Economic stability, homelessness. There's a lot of topics that we just don't necessarily, we're not going to experience all at one time, but a lot of people are experiencing one or two of those. And then again, they want that kind of, they want the input of what the Bible has, but they don't know where to look. So those are like all the different like personal crises or questions that people may have. It's another tool to be able to do that. And one real quick thing I'll say too is that if we go back to like the Gutenberg press, right? What did that effectively do? Well, it made it where previously libraries, which were limited to either a certain, class of the like religious elite, maybe, or people who studied it for a living, or if you were really wealthy, you would have copies of text, right? Important texts that were written down. And that essentially democratized the ability to obtain information. So I think AI is doing some amount of that on a many different levels. And the sort of faith-based communities, I'll speak to Christianity at least because I understand that the best, is usually slow to adopt technology. It's very leery. And so, but somebody has to look into these problems. And I've felt like I'm going to be part of that because of my background. And so, yeah.
It's very interesting. I'm going to have a disclaimer. If I said something silly in the next 40 minutes, I'm going to have you, rest of them, forgive me because this is a topic that's beyond my general average understanding. But I respect, all faiths and all people and all religions and all whatnot. So I'm going to ask you some questions here, and perhaps
Sure.
my ignorance in this space might help the cause. So
Yeah.
you mentioned, you said your familiarity with Christianity specifically, and you called out for a product there. A very high level first question is, in terms of the problem that it's solving,
Mm-hmm.
it's looking for solutions from the Bible, right?
Mm-hmm.
From the scripture there, but but you see the problem and the solution as a product that's generic across faiths, or do you see that the solution that you've built or you're working on, is it very geared from an engineering standpoint, right? From an engineering standpoint, is that very geared towards a particular religion? And I'll tell you why I'm asking this, but I just want to
Yeah.
get that answer initially. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of the concepts I'm using, like RAG, retrieval augmented generation, is that could be used. I mean, that's used in so many contexts. So that could be used for sure in, different faith systems. And I think just in general, the concepts could, prompt engineering, stuff like this. that, we use that every day. Those who are, using AI tools or large language models. My product is definitely geared in a centric way towards Christianity and a biblical worldview.
Okay,
So
perfect. That
yeah,
makes
so
sense,
that,
right?
and I think it would be, you could, if someone wanted to, create this sort of like universalist appeal um, to those different things. But even within there could be things that are contradict. So thinking through the problems of how you actually address, um, the myriad of different types of problems, even a classifier system, like that's something you have to think through too. And that was kind of what I was alluding to with the different problems. So yeah, in short, mine's more specific to a particular belief system, but I think you could adopt those principles if you really wanted to
And I tell
anything.
you why I asked a question, right? See, as an engineer who's been in this business of building software for decades and who's been running a company for many years now, one of the challenges I've seen as an engineer is when you identify a problem, whatever that problem might be, and you start building a solution. And I run a startup, and here is one of the many challenges I have. And tell me if that resonates with you. Is that you identify the problem and you feel like, hey, there isn't a solution out there, so I want to build one, or maybe there are other solutions, but mine is going to be slightly different, whatever the difference in the unique selling proposition is, and you start building it. While the initial aim and the intent is very specific to that problem, as you start solving the problem, many a times I'm in a situation where I'm like, you know what? Maybe the problem is more generic than I initially thought it was. So
Yeah.
now my solution needs to become broader than it was. And now what happens is there have been occasions where I've lost sight of the core problem that I started out with and started genericizing the product so much that you've run into a plethora of other challenges, right? And the reason
Hmm.
I asked the question earlier was Chris thinking about something like that would have been, and I'll tell you that, and you tell me what differences are and where things are right or wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, you know what? People need help and they believe in a religion, maybe one, maybe more, however that works. And they have problems of life, the ways of life, and the challenges the life puts forth to them. And they're looking for these answers, and you're building software. The first thing would be, yeah, you know what? I'm going to work off of the Bible, go whatever, however those pages are, the biblical verses are. Let me make sense out of them and create software. And if I were building that, Preston, a month or a few weeks down the road, I'd be like, you know what? Yeah, sure. A Christian person has a set of challenges and they look to Christianity and Bible.
Hmm.
But a person of a different faith, a Hindu person might have the same challenges. They might look at like Bhagavad Gita or something.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
now I'm like trying to be greedy as a software business owner. Let me try to solve world hunger and not worry about single person's appetite. And I know it can be a double-edged sword, and it happens all the time. I want to get your initial thoughts on how did you go about navigating that phase of software requirements as to why did
Yeah.
you decide to take this path versus other options available there?
Yeah. So it actually, my app started out actually as a journaling app, and I didn't want to solve, I I didn't want to solve the problem of journaling in general. So it was like, how do you combine AI into the journaling world? That was actually too broad for me, and so I narrowed it to like, okay, I understand the sort of like Christian problem of journaling, to a degree, and so I'm like, I think I could build this. And so I went more narrow. And then as I started to get users and I was refining the onboarding and stuff like this, I started to realize I was too narrow, because really what people wanted to do, instead of just like passively share thoughts in a study session or something, was they needed advice. They needed to navigate a hard thing. And so I validated that through kind of a it's not a wizard. I'm trying to think it like a template, right? A journaling template. And so, and then I was able to see, anonymously, of course, like what are the topics people are wanting to get help on. And there was a pretty clear pattern of like people are using this to, get a direct feedback, personalized feedback on their direct issue that's going on, not just like in a general sense. And I think because I understand and certainly believe the Christian worldview more than anything else, I'm like, I feel more equipped to solve that problem um, directly. But again, I think, software is hard in the beginning, right? Because you come up with a million ideas, and if you're not careful, you try to build on a million of them. You don't do anything well. You get feature bloat, and I'm like, okay, I'm trying to get to MVP as quickly as possible, and really just a initial proof of concept in the use. Not just have a product out there, but proof of concept in the use. So, and I think especially when it comes to like belief systems, there's more than enough people out there. If you just stick to one, there's unless you're in like a really really small regional cult or something, like there's enough people to go around for you to, I think, prove it works for that specific kind of viewpoint.
No, I think that makes a lot. So what you're saying essentially is the market in itself. It's you pick the religion here. It's got millions and billions of people. So that's a market that's broad enough, right? That's broad enough. So you try to address the problems that people have in that space. So my follow up question is going to be, just so I digest the underlying features of the product. Would it be like, hey, I have a child who goes to school, say middle school, and maybe they are not doing academically as well as they possibly could or should, and I need help. Would I then come to the product and sort of explain the problem I'm running into and have it pick a solution that's in from the world of Christianity and the Bible and whatnot? How does it? I mean, if that's my problem, how would I be using this?
Yeah. No, fantastic question. So it's all voice based. It's voice based. Which I picked that very specifically because that's have their phone. People are becoming more and more used to just talking things out. People go to therapy. What do? They talk it out. So you have to talk for at least 45 seconds. So there's enough like context on whatever it is. And when you pick one of the templates on, what it is you want to talk about, it'll actually pre-select a relevant Bible verse that gets attached to that. And you can add more if you want. Let's say you're reading, yourself, and you want to add more Bible verses. And so it's gonna, once that's all done, let's say you save it, and it's going to, in the background, of course, transcribe your, what you talked about, and then take the context of those Bible verses, and it's going to go through a bunch of different prompting to give you a 6-point feedback section. So it'll, give you, hey, what was your sentiment during this? What was sort of the summative takeaway? What was the connection to scripture? What are next steps? What's an encouragement from this? And all that's going to be really tweaked based on kind of the leveling of what you're going through. Because if it's just like, if it's just a sort of everyday issue, that's one thing. But if it's very severe, you're dealing with past abuse traumas or something like that, that requires a different kind of approach than just like, hey, I'm kind of feeling down today. I don't really want to go to work. It's so
What is the outcome of that? Sorry, well, I answered question, right? I just want to get an initial idea so I can dissect this further, right? So I go in there to the tool, I speak for 45 seconds. At that point, does the tool, it needs to know a little bit about Krish, or does it not need to know? Like, have I told the tool or the platform a little bit about myself and my background so it knows who I am before I record my question? Or is it just asking me to record a question without knowing anything about me as a user?
No, it's not going to necessarily take into account like Krish's background. That is an interesting question though, because one of the things I do have planned to do is an onboarding guide that's like, where are you at? Do you consider yourself a Christian? Do you not? Are you seeking? Are you part of something else? But no, it doesn't have all that context before knowing you. It's really primarily based on what you share with it in that moment. And then over time, the goal is to basically find, patterns in what you journal about over time, say in the past 2 weeks or something, and give you like a plan of what to work on in a given week. kind of self-improvement plan. It's almost as if you're talking to like a biblical life coach or something like that. Um,
Okay.
and then again, it's taking what you said in context of that verse and then other prompt engineering going on in the background to then give you that breakdown, the 6-point breakdown back to you. So, another word for that is like a devotional. So yeah.
So the 6 point breakdown that it gives me, are those like action items that I need to perform to sort of help myself out of that situation that I find myself in?
Yeah, so it's not going to add it to like a checklist as of yet, but it will tell you, hey, here are verses you can memorize. If it's depending on the severity of what you're talking about, it may say like, basically go reach out to like a pastoral leader or something like that, because that's not what the app's not fully equipped to do that kind of thing. It's not going to advise you through some serious issue. Yeah, so it'll give you anywhere from like that encouragement or other places to go look for in scripture and how they apply to your situation too. So
And it gives a
that's some of
time.
the things.
Yep. So, and then does it give a timeline saying, hey, Krish, day one, do this, day three, do this, day five, do that? Sort of it draws that out?
That's the next sort of iteration that I will be building out, and I actually kind of already have like planned out, is that yes, it would go, hey, do you want a week by week plan? Do you want a 30-day plan of like what to do? Those kinds of things. So you could actually, develop a sort of action plan from your sessions that you record. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm going to stick to the same example if that example is all right enough, which my kid going to elementary or middle school and
Yeah.
not performing academically as well as they probably could or should. So now I took I recorded for 45 seconds. And this question is not necessarily specific to the features that the platform supports, Preston. It's
Mm-hmm.
also ideas that you may have for future and whatnot, right? So
Yeah.
the question's fairly generic. So I record my question. It came up with that 6 point plan, and it's giving me some action items. Uh, that list, because it may or may not know enough about me or anything about me, I'm presuming that 6 point response is going to be rather similar to Preston if Preston were to have asked the same kind of question that Krish did. Correct? Is that a fair assumption to make?
Yeah,
That
there'd
the six
probably be
point list.
some variation in there, but yeah, if we happen to say the exact same things, it would probably be similar. Yeah.
Okay, that's as you build this data, right? As your data gets richer on the platform. But now at a certain point of time, you're going to have a lot of people onboarded onto this platform, and you have a lot of number of different types of issues that they've probably shared with the platform as well. Now that becomes data that you own essentially, right? I'm going to come
Yeah.
to, you mentioned RAG initially, and it's very interesting. So I want to see how that plays a role here. Now this happens, and you have all of your data, personal data that your users have shared with you, their personal life and professional lives and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, you have the Bible, which is a standard scripture, right, for everybody. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know, this could be, I don't know if there's multiple versions of a Bible, but let's say there is a core fundamental version.
There's core versions, and then there's like types of translations. Some of them are not really, you wouldn't use, some you would, yes, but you're
Okay,
right.
cool.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's say there's a core version that it's got all of these pages, and now as you build this data, the book in itself does not change the Bible, but your
Mm-hmm.
data gets richer and richer and it gets tuned. So your response, let's say a year down the road, if Krish or somebody like Krish were to have asked the same question, the exact same question, how do you expect that response to have changed through this process of your data using RAG as a technology and using the data that's coming from the Bible?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So that is an aspect, of course, of what any software company is doing. You're building a database. And so I just updated our site to kind of reflect this, is like we will we have the ability, of course, to look at anonymously, like what is the feedback being given and what is it based on, in such a way that like we're going to continuously want to improve what it is that you get back. So how that might change over time is that, for one, there's more information collected about you up front. So again, you could say, hey, these are my beliefs. How long have you considered yourself X, Y, or Z? So, talking to someone who's like a new Christian versus someone who's been, going to church for 30 years, it's different. But just knowing life milestones too. So knowing, like, did you get married? Did you get divorced? Did you have a child? Did you experience, loss of a family member? Like, people being able to share those things. I expect those as data points to be more of an indicator of, like, hey, how can we better tailor the results to them? So that's a couple different ways. There's also a way for people to give feedback in the app of, like, hey, did this resonate with you? Why or why not? And so that's
That
another
actually that was
feedback loop.
that's a good segue, because that was going to be my next question. Let's say I have the 6 point plan and I followed through on that. Do I come back and provide feedback on, hey, this helped me, this did not help me, and or how much it helped me, so it can help your system learn and provide better or improved feedback or responses down the road?
Yeah. So you can take notes actually on the plan itself, and then you can give the direct feedback that's like rating it. So it's not just a rating, but it's like, hey, why did you rate it this way? But yes, I mean, all those things in the future, the plan is that would be a consideration in the types of feedback that you're getting.
Okay. And then you took an example of somebody who's a new Christian versus somebody who might have been one for 3 decades and has been going to the church.
Yeah.
Even let's take those two people who have the same problem, right? So they come
Mm-hmm.
and speak to this product and they narrate it, right? They do the voice for 45 seconds. After they record this, let's say you've learned enough about this user, as one being new and one being a Christian for many years. Is your response going to change because of the very fact that one has more experience in that religion versus another, or is the response going to be agnostic to how long they've been part of that same faith?
Yeah, so I haven't worked out the nuance of all that yet,
Okay.
but just off the top of my head, I think it would depend on what kind of problem it is too. Um, so it's hard to speak to the specifics of that particularly, um, but if someone has a sort of deeper, like, there may be terms that you could use with someone who's more familiar with different concepts in Christianity versus someone who just came in the door yesterday, so to speak. So to that note, maybe the nomenclature, the lingo might, evolve a bit. But yeah, and then, I mean, age could be another one too. I mean, someone who's 25 versus 70, those are very different life phases. Or, yeah. So those are, again, the types of things that I would like to become factors in the person's being able to get advice, because, let's say you're um, really wondering, hey, I have a lot of free time. I'm conflicted because I would like to, serve and help other people, but I also have all these fun projects that I want to do. And I want to go make $1 bajillion,
Right.
what's, what's behind all that? And what, the reality of, is that even achievable? Depending on age, that's, could be a very different type of guidance, especially in, like, I think a Christian worldview, where it's like, hey, you are in this mentorship period of life versus you're very young and you're working towards building a family. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of nuance in all of this, and these questions you're asking are so great, because this is like a very small subset of the things that I'm having to just really kind of meditate on every day, to be like, how am I going
No, I
to
can, Preston, I
continue
can
to
imagine
improve?
you've taken two easy problems: software and religion. No, I'm just kidding, right? Yeah, and you're like, yeah, let's put it together. How difficult can it be? And also,
Yeah,
how non-opinionated can this be? People
yeah.
have no opinions about religion or software, right? So it could be a piece of cake. No, I'm just kidding. This is very interesting. The whole idea is interesting to me for two reasons. Again, one, because it is interesting. That's, for whatever it is. I find it interesting. And two, I have no clue about this, so it's even more interesting, right? The less I know about something, the more excited I generally am. So it's very exciting. So let me keep picking your brain there, right? And again, these questions are
Yeah.
generic, not just to your platform as it stands today. I'm more trying to get to the thought process of the software and how it's getting built and how it's going to
Yeah.
change. The next thing I want to ask is, in terms of the interaction that you have as a user with the software,
Hmm.
how do you see that play? You mentioned demographics a little bit, but I think it's an important thing to note. Let's
Hmm.
say I'm a very young Christian kid who's just graduated from college versus somebody who is nearing retirement, and we have, I'm sure the two people are not going to have the same type of problems, but for convenience of me asking this question,
Hmm.
let's be let's humor my presumptuous nature here and say the two people had the same question for whatever reason at a point of time. The
Hmm.
way you dish out the answers and the responses to this, Preston, how much difference do you see in that? In other words, somebody who's near retirement and has been a Christian for years might, I'm assuming, can get a response back in text or voice very formally, and that might appeal to them. Whereas a kid who's getting out of college, who's playing video games and going to spring break to Miami, might want it slightly differently, possibly, right?
Yeah.
Or am I being presumptuous? Is that interaction going to be changed based on the demographic, or is not going to be that different?
I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say like a young person doesn't read anything, you know.
Right. No, I'm not saying they read and don't read anything. I'm just saying they like the answers maybe a little bit
But
differently than the.
the delivery. Okay, so this is one of the ways I actually plan on tackling kind of a variation of what you're talking about, which is just how does someone prefer to receive information? So let's take it on like a book versus Audible format, right? Do you want to sit down with a book, or do you want to go on a walk and listen to someone read it to you? So I do have that plan where basically you could pick a verse, and once I get internationalization in there, you could, of course, pick someone with a dialect that you're familiar with or something like that, and have that read out the actual person, session results to you. So in essence, you start to get this like kind of like personal podcast playback of the feedback on your situation. Now, in terms of, I guess, modifying the emotionality or something like that behind, the response based on age, that's a possibility. That's also, that's kind of and I think as people building software, right, we got to get kind of weigh the pros and cons for, is it worth it to get into this really nuanced area of a product, or do we start going down a path that is like not really of huge, it's not of much benefit, right? Because I could go, hey, man, woman, age range, the just all sorts of things. But I think there's a way to perhaps meaningfully tie in those elements. But then again, right, it's like if I blanket statement, well, all baby boomers like things phrased this way, and then Gen X, and then millennial, and then Gen Z, and then Gen Alpha, who knows what they want. So unless it's research oriented to some degree, I wouldn't go down the route of some forms of personalization.
Okay. So the,
Yeah.
the reason I brought that up, right? See, sometimes, we live in a world also where you tend to react to think the same thing differently, not always, at least, not necessarily based on the content of what is being said to you, but
Mm,
it's also by who says that exact same thing to you, right? We're just
mm,
humans and that happens all the time. I'm going to
yeah.
give a preposterous example, right?
Okay.
Let's say if my wife said something, I would react to it, say a certain way. And if one of my favorites, Scarlett Johansson, said that on TV, I might be like, yeah, that makes more sense than I initially thought, for instance. It's a preposterous example, but the reason I
Yeah.
mention that is sometimes you connect with the character, connect with the person, connect with who's making those
Mm,
statements. And I'm going to buy it because, sometimes when I watch this video, if Jim Carrey says something, I mean, I love him, so I just watch it regardless, whatever he
yeah.
says. The only reason I asked that was how personalized or customized does this thing need to be so it actually does not get lost in translation. You know what I mean? I'm just giving you some context to why I asked that.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that came to mind actually when you were saying that is people who are they just say something and it's funny just because of their mannerisms, you know?
Right,
Um,
absolutely.
but I think the question you're asking is sort of, I think my goal is to make it as personalized as it needs to be effective for the person. But beyond that, it's a diminishing return. Um, and so, and I won't, there's a lot of this I just won't know till I get more people and more, more of a feedback loop of the different kinds of, demographics, of course, that are using it. And that could be I mean, because it is, I mean, you have Christians in probably every country in the world, just about, right? And on the App Store, it's available. And I think there's like people in 10 or 11 countries that have downloaded it. And so that's something I'm going to have to think through at some point is like, okay, well, there is the commonality of the language of the Bible. But then there may be things that I just don't understand about, like a Coptic, Egyptian Orthodox type of viewpoint. So,
Wow. So
yeah.
Preston, for instance, right? Let's say we take how much does culture? We talked religion a little bit, right? How much
Mhm.
does culture play a role here? And here's what I mean by that.
Yeah.
See, there's Christians, like you mentioned. You made a great point. There's Christians in almost every nation in the world, but the number of Christians and the size and the impact is surely going to be different. So let's
Yeah.
say, I was born and raised in India. I don't want to misquote it. Maybe 5% Christians, if I'm not wrong. So there's a
Hmm.
sizable number, but it's not the majority, right? It's a
Right.
minority religion. But if you take the US, it's a majority religion. You take Europe, it's different, right? The majority religion. So uh, and not only the number of people practicing that in any country or any geographic region, my question also has to do with their basic culture and other tenets of their life and lifestyles. So
Yeah.
a Christian in Australia and Sydney versus a Christian in Auckland and New Zealand versus a Christian in UK versus one in the US versus one in Latin America, when they interact with the same piece of software, do you expect there to be difference in, like, I asked the interaction and the usability differences for the demographics, but this being, how do you think, do you first of all think there should be some differences here because of their cultural impact and that combined with religion, or do you think that that may or may not make a big difference?
Yeah. Fair question. This is an interesting thing about like a standardized text. So I think the first thing is it's not like all Christians or people in any religion, right? It's not like they all agree. I mean, there's a lot of nuances in certain things. But for now, it's like, okay, reinforce the core tenets of Christianity, but there's within the shades of those things, I don't know. I'm not going to pretend like I do know of what those are. But what I was going to say before I kind of went off into another thought is the great thing is scripture is consistent around all these different faiths, or these different, I should say, um, locations, right? If I go to, like, the only difference might be like in the Ethiopian Bible, they're going to have some, books that maybe the Western Bible doesn't, or in certain Catholic Bibles, they may have extra books. Those are considered extra biblical. The rest of them are like fair territory. So there's like a commonality of like thought and language, and the things that are um potentially like divisive, then you go back to certain concepts where, okay, should I have alcohol or not? There are Christians who will be like, no, you shouldn't. And then there are that are like, yeah, I don't, it's not bad as long as I'm not going out and getting really drunk. So um those things, though, it's like, okay, it should draw you back to like praying about those decisions versus dictating, yes, you should. And so it's like, first and foremost, what is scripture basically saying? And maybe at some point culturally, but that's also hard to do too. How do you codify, the nuances of even a local culture? Like you said, if you're in Auckland versus, somewhere in Australia.
Yeah, because Preston, you said somewhere in your brilliant response there, you said I did not know, and I was like going to say, Preston, come on, you haven't figured out religion. It's very
Oh,
simple.
geez.
Everyone's
Yeah.
in agreement. There's no disagreements because I think you make many interesting points there. One is as little as I know about my own religion, I know even lesser about other religions. But when I talk to my mom, she lives in India. We talk all the time. Uh, Not that she's an expert by any stretch of the imagination. She knows as little about our religion as I do, but while she says something and she says something the next day, I was like, did you not say the same thing differently the previous day? And she's like, no, I don't think so. And I'm like, you know what? Forget about agreements and disagreements and divisiveness across religions and people. Even between two people, the mom and the son, we say the same thing. And we're like, are we sure we said the exact same thing, right? So, by virtue of saying that, what I want to ask you is, no topic is easy, no software is easy, but this is one of the hardest things out there, right? Trying to find agreement these days on any topic is hard enough, but
Right.
even like you said, not that everybody's going to agree on everything. So when you curate these responses to certain questions that people do ask on the platform, Preston, either now or later down the road,
Yeah.
um, do you anticipate, and I don't know if this makes sense, but I'm going to throw the question regardless. You're going to be like, hey, Krish, you asked a good question. Here's the problem you're running into. Here are some ways that you can help yourself solve the problem. But here are some ways that other people have tried and it
Mm.
has or has not worked out for them. And here are some ways that people actually should not even bother doing because that thing does not work out. Meaning,
Mhm.
what I'm trying to say there, Preston, is trying to give curate a response that is void of euphemisms and political correctness, and
Mhm.
having the consumer sort of draw comparisons and parallels and pick and choose which one might work best for them. Would that be an approach, or would the approach be, no, not really? We kind of understand what you're asking, and here is what we would like for you to do to make your life better.
Um. Yeah, I wouldn't. I wouldn't go that route because what I'd rather rely on is basically the pattern of what they're talking about and the feedback they're getting given to see like, hey, is there? And I've tested this on myself in the sense of like, you're creating a you know a theme, right? That when we think about it, and I've gone to grief therapy, talk therapy years ago, and you inevitably end up having a certain thing that you're working through, and you talk about it in a variety of different ways. But sometimes it's hard to find the thread in there, and so and at current, I will say my app's not designed to like solve all your problems by any means either, right? It's supposed to like help you at least have a reflective point to be able to understand what it is I'm going through, and then scripturally some context there. Um, I think it gets into more of a almost a dicey territory if it gets like, hey, like this here's a lot of prescriptive things you should do that are like outside the context of like what the Bible says. Maybe we'll get there, but there's a lot more learning that I think needs to happen. That's what I'm trying to just keep it focused on, like scriptural solutions for now, and maybe obvious practical ones related to that. If it's like, hey, go, talk to get pastoral care or something like that. But if it's like, you should plan a 14-day hike in the mountains and then go pray at the top of the highest peak, like something,
Right.
a little more abstract like that. I don't expect to do that. But again, I don't know because it's still early on.
Right.
I have visions for some of these things, and I'm not trying to contradict that the notion of saying, hey, it could give someone a plan, here's your plan this week to focus on these things. But again, it's based on your ability to just vocalize and reflect on, the things that you are
And
sharing.
in your great answers, right? In your response, you said hiking. Maybe one day down the road, you'll be like, "Hey, you should go on a 14-day hike, and here is the company we recommend." Just go have an ad pop up or something there.
I know all trails gets in there. Well, I am talking to different like ministries and companies out there who could actually like be partners to be able to if someone does need help. Of course, if someone is talking in like a serious vein of hurting themselves, immediately there's the abuse and suicide hotlines and that kind of stuff that it'll pop up for them right away. Um, but no, there are lots of different ministries that might really specialize in one thing. Like I'm actually working with another woman named April, and so she has a whole library of health and wellness, courses that you can take. So if someone's like constantly talking about, let's say I think I have stage 2 cancer and blah blah blah, think everything associated with that, it may be like, hey, here's another kind of library of information that could be really helpful for you. So I love that that's the ethos and the people I'm talking to in this world is we're not trying to all own and just like corner people into our own apps and not be able to share and lean on each other for the different resources that other people have built. And yeah, that's like a partner ecosystem and all that kind of stuff.
No, that makes a lot of sense. We have about 10 minutes. I want to ask you a couple of things, and then I'll give you an opportunity to ask me anything you want to ask me as well. The thing I want to ask is, let's say you're building this in, say, 2025, 2026, when AI has been lock, stock, and barrel in the mix of things. So I want to ask you, if you could pick one or two things, or maybe three, or as many as you could, that you're able to do differently or much better, or faster, or however you want to use all those nice Apple-like adjectives, because AI is in the mix. In other words, you're like, hey, I could have still done this, but I could have done it differently if I did not have these AI tools, but I'm doing it a whole lot better, right? So what are some things you're doing differently, or what are some things you think you could not have possibly done if not for the technologies available as we speak?
Yeah, I mean, I think easily building software applications. And I say I couldn't have because monetarily it would have been a limitation. I mean, I think most of us know if you were to approach a dev team and say, hey, could you build me this MVP for this SaaS product? You're like, yeah, it's $20,000 to $50,000, pretty easy. I mean, this is why people were going raising angel investment rounds, because it costs a lot of money to get the initial product going. So that, and I don't just mean like, I'm going to go build a SaaS. I mean, I've built a mobile app, not just Psalmlog, but another one as well. Internal tools, all that kind of stuff. The other one would be workflows. So actually in my last company, we were trying to solve an issue with finance, and this had to do with B2B contracts. And it's like, well, how are the invoices getting sent out? And there was just a lot of nuance. We didn't have the resources to go build some custom or onboard some custom solution that would be, as modular as we wanted, like a Maxio or whatever. But we were able to figure it out with like a really cool N8 N sequence that we built in-house. And so solving those problems that I think you would normally think, oh, that's this really expensive enterprise tool over here. But wait, with some elbow grease and like, an agentic workflow or whatever you want to call it, just a more sophisticated workflow sequence, you can solve that problem. I think the other is just like ideating in general, not just in, hey, I want to build a product, but being able to get research done at a crazy clip. That's one of the things an LLM is best for, is if you can give the right information and guardrails, and it has the right resources to go after making sense of all that information. I mean, I've done like pricing surveys where it showed me kind of patterns in there that I didn't normally see, and insights. I like QA that, but yeah.
Preston, that's very important. Whatever you said there is super important, super honest, appreciate that, and super important. Because I had a conversation with a founder not too long ago who said that she was able to get something done as a non-developer, like a non-engineering founder, with a couple of engineers who are actually not even out of college, right? So they had never graduated, not as yet, which is unthinkable, unfathomable, even as recently as a couple of years ago. So if you could just speak to our engineering audience there as to, and you mentioned how difficult or how expensive it would have been. Fast forward to today. what is the size of the team that you see is able to build these MVPs, Preston? Like, how many people do you think you might have needed, or how much money do you think would have had to go into this effort pre AI, and how much did it actually need using these tools?
Yeah. I mean, I think a typical MVP, let's say 20,000, $100,000. I mean, and that seems like a broad range, but it's just, do you have off the shelf libraries you can
Right.
use, or are these really like bespoke, kind of functionality that you're trying to build, and then just all the testing that's involved, which you still have to test stuff for sure. I mean, it's not like I make and it goes bye bye. The other thing I'd say is hopefully gonna give some confidence to more senior engineers in a way, is the fact that like um, this whole notion of making MVPs, which I do have a pretty deep technical background. I can go do it by myself. I understand how databases work and all that kind of stuff, and surely not everything, but I can architect it together. But the beauty of this too is like by the time ideally that I need that like really senior engineering help, um, I'm able to present a much clearer understanding of what it is I'm trying to solve, as opposed to, hey, let's just build this thing and here's like, the notes scribbled on, a piece of paper, because this is making, especially if you're not in like the product manager or product management world, it's making people who've never done it think through their problem a lot more, because you have to. If it's just something that looks okay but breaks after like 2 uses, whatever, you're not going to do that much with it anyways. But if it's actually building out a tool that could be really useful, then you're going to have to understand it a lot better. And at some point, if that thing takes off, in theory, we're going to have the $1 billion company, but I don't know. I feel like we're a ways away from that. I think you're still going to need capable, skilled people who can, take care of the systems and evolve them correctly. So
I think that makes a lot of sense, right? And I've heard that from a lot of other people as well. Like, up until MVP, earlier you had to depend or hire a developer to even help you get that far. Now the world is a very different place in nicer ways where you don't necessarily need that. But that does not mean that you're able to take it further all the way to production, the higher environments, without somebody who has a slightly deeper understanding and experience about how this thing works. So the number of people you need has changed, the type of people you need has changed, and the amount of money that goes into this space has changed as well. So everything that you've said there not only makes a lot of sense, but it's in sync with what I've actually heard from a lot of the other people as well. As we come to the tail end of this, Preston, I have a non-technical question to ask of you, which I ask of all of my
yeah.
guests. That's a simple question, but before I go there, any questions you want to ask me that I could possibly answer?
Yeah. I mean, what are you most excited or concerned about with all this usage of different types of AI tools?
Great question, right? I've been asked that before, but I'm going to change my answer so it doesn't sound cliched, right? Because I'm learning
Okay.
more as I go as well. What's exciting is I've been in the business of building software for, I don't know, more than 2 decades, right? Maybe 2.5 decades now. Things have always changed at a fast pace. I never know a time where I only worked I was very young when I came here. I've only worked in the US, so I know that it was never slow to begin with. Not here, not for us, certainly not. Certainly not in this industry. So when people tell me things are changing fast, when people tell that to developers, it takes us a little bit of time to digest because we've already used to a faster change of pace. But that being said, things are changing even faster now, right?
Hmm.
Dramatically, right? It's completely changed, and I think we are at a point of inflection here, right? Software is never going to be built, or should not be built, I should say, anywhere near the way it was built in the past. The architecturally, it needs to be completely different, which is why, at Snowpal, where we build multi products and we have many in production, we are also an API company. As we're working on this next fintech API, Preston, we are looking at things very differently. We know we have to solve real life problems, right? That doesn't change. But the way you go about solving those problems, I'm not just talking about the executable or interpreted code that's running machines interpreting and executing it, right? Not binaries.
Hmm.
Even up until the point you create those binaries, How do you go about solving that problem? How do you construct or compose this team? Your team composition should change. It's not three developers, one tester, one product manager, one part-time scrum master or whatnot, right? We're going to have to look at software as though it's never been built before in many ways, because the user interfaces are going to have to change. It's not just humans that are going to look at your websites anymore, right? It's going to be AI agents that are going to interact with your web pages and websites. So it's human to agent, agent to agent, and maybe some human to human left. So we are at a great point in the business, in the world of engineering, but not to say that you cannot be anxious about this as well, right? If somebody can start a business with two students in college who are in the third year, and I'm a firm believer that college is good if you can make the most out of it. Otherwise, maybe not so much, right? I was in college for a long time, so I might sound like a hypocrite, but I've changed the way of life and the things I believe in. I don't think college is going to be for everybody. It never was in America. And as somebody coming from overseas, where, in India, everyone goes to college, it's like a default thing. So I was surprised and I was not sure. But now, years down the road, I'm like, you know what? This makes a whole lot more sense than it did to me, like, maybe 20 years earlier, for instance, right? So I think people have to go spend money on college only if they have to. It's my opinion that spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a diploma that sometimes or most times does not even help you, because people graduate with $70,000 in debt and get an English degree. I mean, I love English as a language, but unless that diploma is going to help me pay off my student bills or tuition, or my loans, I should say, sorry, in quick time, maybe not, right? So I think all of us have to look at life, our professional lives, a little bit differently or dramatically differently than we've done in the past. At least that's my 2 cents. Yeah.
Yeah. Great answer.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you for your closing comments, but before that, my simple non-tech, and I asked you very simple questions. Right now, I'm kidding. It's about religion and engineering. This is the simplest of the questions. Maybe not so simple for some people. What is your favorite dish? One dish. If you can name one, that's your favorite. What is it? And since our audience is all over the world, just you may have to explain what that is as well.
Yeah, food, right?
Yeah, food. Yep, sorry. Comfort food, one dish. Yeah.
I love ribeye and like a homemade fettuccine pasta with like egg fettuccine pasta.
Okay, I think most people would understand that, but we've got some audience in parts of the world that's heavily vegetarian. So if you wouldn't mind explaining that for just a minute, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, so ribeye is just it's a cut of the cow that's very tender, and if you cook it right on like cast iron or something like that, it's very good with like rosemary and butter. And then I love making noodles by hand. And so I'll make they're a traditional like Italian style fettuccine noodles. So it's flour, olive oil, salt, and eggs, chicken eggs. And so you put all that together, and there's a cool process of pressing out the noodles and then cutting them and then you just use let's see, when you're done cooking the noodles, you mix in some of the pasta water and cheese. That's all you need. And it's
beautifully explained. We have a small percentage of our listeners based out of India. The way you explained ribeye, I'm pretty sure some of them are like, holy cow. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. That was very well. So this was amazing. Thank you for the time, Preston. So as closing comments, right? By the way, after I hit stop recording, if you could just stay on the call for like a minute, we appreciate that. What would be your, let me thank you first and do one more introduction. Folks, Preston Zeller, I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. So definitely check out Zellerhaus, a venture studio. I'm going to include the links to LinkedIn, Preston's LinkedIn profile, and also to zellerhaus.com. So you can definitely check out the product and the platform. So thank you for taking the time, Preston. Much appreciated. So what would be your closing comments as we wrap this up?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to get caught up in just doing the work and not being connected to what the work means. So I think anytime we can do that, if it's not where you are, find somewhere to do that. And I think you go make a bigger, more personal, personally and profound impact on with your skill set. So especially for a lot of the technical people here.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Till next time, Preston. See you later.
Thanks, Chris.